have a box with small crayons. They make beautiful drawings. Red, yellow, blue, black, all sorts of them. I love my small box with crayons. With my golden yellow crayon, I draw the sun which shines over us. It shines so brilliantly over all China because the sun is Chairman Mao. With my crayon that's black or brown, I draw a Negro boy oppressed by the imperialists. Oh, dear friend, we will help you. Children everywhere will help you. Carefully with my crayon of red, I draw the red band of our nation. Always we will follow the party and the revolution. And we will beat American imperialism.
The People's Republic of China has been in existence for 15 years. These have not been tranquil years. The imperialists, headed by the United States, and the reactionaries of various countries have tried to strangle us by every means. Nevertheless, as Chairman Mao said, only heroes can quell tigers and leopards. Never will the brave be cowed by wild bears.
Peking, capital city of the People's Republic of China, Red China. The voice we hear is proud, strident, militant, claiming power not yet achieved, goals which may be only propaganda or may be real. Yet, only a few hundred miles from China's borders in South Vietnam, America's military power is growing. Will China's rulers read the daily battle reports as foreshadowing an inevitable American victory which cannot be tolerated? Will they choose war or a compromised peace? In the following hour, we'll try as best we can to answer that question through the eyes of experts who have been there this past year, and through films, some new, some historical, some propaganda. While making up a picture of communist China at this critical moment of history, 1966, perhaps the year of the gun. For nearly 2 decades, since the communists seized power in 1949, China has kept much of Asia at war, sometimes using her own vast manpower, and is often urging her neighbors into wars of national liberation, fighting China's cause without spilling Chinese blood. Here in Cleveland, they know which moves on our part could provoke the Chinese rulers in Peking to decide on war, and Washington is determined to avoid these moves. But America's leaders are also determined to stand fast in Vietnam. In assessing their ability to wage war, China's leaders have not far to look to find their chief strength. It is China's enormous landmass, 150,000 square miles larger than the United States, plus its people, mostly crowded in a thick band toward the coast. Experts guess there are between 730 and 750 million Chinese here. By the year 1980, there will be 1 billion Chinese. It is on the backs of this vast manpower that China moves today, as it has done for untold centuries. Even in the cities, she moves mostly on bicycle power. Primitive, yes, to those of us in the West who have traded muscle power for machine power. But if we are to understand China today, her strengths, her weaknesses, and her intentions for peace or war, we must look at China through Chinese eyes. Who are their leaders? How do they exercise absolute power over so vast a population? On top of the leadership pyramid is the national idol, the unifier, the leader of the revolution, Mao Zedong, now being deified by that revolution, turned into a god to hold China together after he dies.
Our beloved and respected Chairman Mao, it is you who inspire us with willful revolution. It is you who lead us from victory to victory. It is you who make us understand that we may pride ourselves on being Chinese. It is you who teach us to grasp the worldwide significance of the Chinese Revolution. We will follow you forever and march on triumphantly.
He is an old man, 73 at this point, who obviously shows signs of the very difficult life that he has led.
Mark Gain of the Toronto Star knew the communist leaders in the 1940s. He visited them again last year. Since their decisions for peace or war will be based partly on their knowledge of us, I asked Mr. Gain if they seem to understand us.
There has been no change in the minds of the leaders of China between 1947, when I spoke to them in the Northwest in the caves, and last year. On every key issue, their thinking remains the same. Now, if I may illustrate this to you, I went to see Mao in his cave. At one point in our meeting, which lasted for 10 hours, Mao Zedong asked me how soon would the Great Depression come to the United States. Now, this was in February of 1947. He said, the fact is that once you have this depression, which must come, then the toiling masses of Americans will march on Washington, and they will overthrow the Wall Street government, and they will establish a democratic regime that will be friendly to democratic governments outside, democratic systems, including our own, including the Chinese Communist.
Mr. Gain was in China again last year during the Vietnam protest marches in Washington.
And here was an editorial saying that great masses of Americans have converged on Washington. The toiling masses of Americans have decided they've had enough of this imperialist, bandit Wall Street government. 17 years, the interpretation of social and political currents in the United States has remained unchanged.
Mao's misunderstanding of the United States is apparently shared by all China's top leaders, who are as tough as Mao and old. These are official portraits the Chinese people see everywhere. Mao's chosen successor is Liu Shao-Chi, 68, China's president. I asked Mr. Gain how Liu compared to Mao.
Their minds are exactly alike. If anything, there's a slight variation in their thinking. I found Mao Zedong slightly more moderate than Liu Shao-Chi. I remember Mao Zedong was talking about the possibility of taking Chiang Kai-shek into some sort of a coalition government. Liu Shao-Chi's comment was very simple: kill him.
Best known of China's top leaders is Chou En-Lai, 68, former foreign minister and world traveler. He is now the Chinese prime minister. Marshal Zhu Da, 80, father of the Red Chinese Army, leading general in the war against Chiang Kai-shek. Deng Xiaoping, 66, main spokesman in the bitter feud with Moscow. Lin Piao, a mere 58, defense minister, issued last year's famous blueprint for China's worldwide revolution. Chen Yun, 65, a top-flight economic planner even by Western standards. Such are the men who will decide whether indeed 1966 is to be the year of the gun. Will they allow old prejudices, old suspicions to warp their decisions? Suspicion of foreigners and foreign ideas lies deep in China's heritage. To keep foreigners out, she built her Great Wall, and behind it lived in splendid isolation. Today, her leaders have built a more fearsome wall, a wall of propaganda through which no ideas except approved ideas can penetrate. If Mao should call for war with the United States, China's people will follow him and believe they will win. These posters tell them so, and there is no one to say otherwise. Contact with Westerners is discouraged, as ABC News cameraman Ole Niesgaard discovered. Niesgaard, a Dane, spent a month filming in Red China for this report. He asked to interview people.
The answer was that I arrived Peking as a cameraman, not as a correspondent, so as a cameraman I couldn't ask a question. They asked me to go out to make film about the workers' settlement, which should be something very modern. And they asked me to go out and do a film about that, something they would like to show. And then I say, well, I will do that, but I would also at the same time like to show people how the slum is. After 2 days, I get permission to go out to the slum. I come out to the quarter of Shanghai and was received on the street by thousands and thousands of people. Well, thousands of people that was waiting in the streets. He was well nicely dressed, and when I walk on the streets, they applaud me, and I had to, of course, applaud them too. But it was arranged. It was a part of the program. It was arranged. Before I went out there, they had to take 2 days to do it, and then I was received by thousands of people. It's awful easy to go around in China and do a film if you just do as the people want, as the guys want you to do.
In short, do as you're told, and they do, for they are constantly reminded of how bad things were and how good they are now by comparison. A Chinese-Russian propaganda film recalls China's bitter past, her poverty and her humiliation by foreigners.
It was in such exhaustive drudgery that the people lived in a land where sweat and tears were equally cheap. Shanghai was a city of the most cruel exploitation of man.
As with all effective propaganda, this has a basis in fact. Dr. Han Suyin, author of A Many-Splendored Thing and The Crippled Tree, was born and raised in China. She visits her homeland often. She tells ABC's Liu Shao-Chi about pre-revolutionary times.
I got quite close to seeing the real problem of China, the problem of peasant poverty, the problem of the land. The 85 to 90% of the people on the land living in absolutely miserable conditions. And it was absolutely no use making beautiful cities because these beautiful cities were just like pimples, you know, superimposed on this poverty. In Sichuan, which is my province, it meant that there were 148 taxes to pay. 148 taxes to pay by the peasant. And some of the taxes in Sichuan were levied 70 years ahead, so that the poor peasant never had any means of accumulating capital. He could never become, in other words, even moderately prosperous. If he struck a bad year, he went to the landowner, who was also the usurer, to borrow money. And money interest was at 36 to 59%, and in times of famine, 100% a year interest. And I think it is very important to realize that it is from this mass of poverty that has sprung the communist revolution.
Today, the regime decrees that the revolution must not be forgotten. During and shortly after the revolution, a Russian film company, using a Chinese cast of thousands, recreated the bloodshed, the revenge against the landlords, and the victory for audiences inside China and out.
The peasants brought the landowners to trial, took away the land they had stolen and the homes they had built with the tears and suffering of the people.
This scene was carefully staged. Notice that in front of the tank, you can see the tracks from the rehearsal.
the residence of the traitor to the people, Chiang Kai-shek. There was no longer any force in the whole world that would stop or retard the liberation of all China. The army had brought them emancipation from the landowner's yoke and from the plunder of the Kuomintang officials. It had brought them liberty. These young people wrote, "Long live Mao Zedong! Long live the People's Liberation Army!" Mao Zedong proclaims the birth of the People's Republic of China.
The year was 1949. Out of the upheaval came Mao's China, moving at times rapidly, at times haltingly, but moving. Mark Gain, back after 17 years, observes.
There's a great deal of change, and at the same time there's very little. First, the very small change. It is especially obvious in the villages. I would drive into a village and I would have to pinch myself to realize that 17 years have elapsed since my previous visit. Everything remained the same, including even people pulling plows and men, women, and children pushing these tremendous grindstones, millstones, to grind their grain. But there was also at the same time a very impressive and vast change that I found. It was certainly obvious in education.
In pre-revolutionary China, there were virtually no free public schools. Today, there are 1 million free primary schools with 100 million students. These youngsters are learning characters. When they can read, Peking will provide the text. Again, Mark Gain.
In the past, you had epidemics in China. Well, the epidemics have been stopped. You don't find children with scabs on them, children with rickets. You don't find children with distended bellies. The sights that used to almost to tear at your heart in the past, in the 40s and the 30s, these sights are no longer there.
Another observer of change is Morris Wills, an American soldier in the Korean War. He was captured, then defected to China for 11 years. He returned to the United States last fall. U.S. officials consider his understanding of the Chinese city dweller unique in the West.
He now has a feeling of security. He knows that he's always going to have something to eat, and a place to stay, and something to wear. It doesn't preoccupy his mind at all where the next meal is coming from. It may not be very much, it may not be very good, but at least there's going to be something.
What Wills observed is true in the cities today. During the harvest seasons, a variety of food is available in the city. In the countryside, it's more hit and miss. China today manufactures some of nearly everything, but most of it is too expensive for the average worker. In Shanghai, for example, leather shoes cost 1 week's wages. Appliances, even the old-fashioned treadle-type sewing machine, cost a city worker his entire pay for 4 months. A television set would cost him his pay for over a year. And anyway, television programming is available only in the big cities and for but a few hours a day. Even then, most people must watch in public gathering places, like Peking's North Lake Park, once the playground of emperors. To many, it seems a good life, a convincing reason to support the communist regime. Morris Wills.
I'd say that most of the young people believe that life is better in China now today than it was under Chiang Kai-shek. And a certain percentage of the older people also believe it's better. And I am inclined to believe that, that their life is better than it was under Chiang Kai-shek.
If life for the average Chinese is better than it was before the revolution, if the people know only what the regime wants them to know, then they would follow their leaders into the year of the gun if Mao decides to pull the trigger. Two questions then arise. Is there meaningful dissent inside China, and can China's economy sustain a major war?